and welcome to the channel. I work at the Lonestar Diner, on the road from Carson City to Reno. The name of the diner has, of course, changed for obvious reasons. More on that later. Why am I working at the Lonestar Diner, on the road from Carson City to Reno? Well, because kind stranger, my life plans didn't work out. In general, if you get caught working in a diner after college, especially one in the middle of nowhere, it might mean things aren't going so well. But still, why this diner? Why Lonestar specifically? I'm aware that you are probably not really asking these questions, but I think they deserve an answer. Of all the diners in the world, what makes Lonestar special is the pay. The pay is fucking great. There are maybe 10 other diners within a 30-minute drive from where I live. Most of them average a little over minimum wage. Meanwhile, Lonestar pays an average of $50 an hour, and that hourly rate is due to single, solitary reason. No matter what anyone tells you, because of him. My first day on the job went more or less well. I'd worked in customer service before, so I felt I could cope with the strange surprises that, unique to diners, I was able to adapt to the inconsistency of the rules quite quickly. Unwritten rules, like some areas of the restaurant, have to be spotless at all times. Others boss lady couldn't care less about. Serve customers quickly, but not too quickly. Asshole. Customers don't really like it here. If you get there too fast, give them time to feel the ground under their feet, to stare miserably ahead, and mourn what might have been. Dinner stuff. You're here because you want to be alone. Forgive the contradiction. Vaguely defined, of course, whispered only by ghosts. Rules extended to the cooks, too. If you were somehow secret, celebrity chef Marco Pierre White in the flesh. Your job was to keep your bloody prowess to yourself. Your job is to make the as decently as possible. Not bad, but not amazing. Just bad enough to be really good. That's what the customers are there for. As the weeks went by, I rose, or I suppose I crouched. I rose to the occasion quite well. You want deliberate, pinpoint precision, mediocrity? You've come to the right place. Most of the customers just wanted coffee and brunch, brought to them at medium speed, with a semi-predictable cadence from the waiter or waitress. Check in afterwards. Done, done, and done. Not one for subtlety. One day I finally decided to ask my boss that, in the middle of a shift, I didn't want to spoil a good thing by doubting him. But fuck me if I wasn't a little curious. Not a full look into the gift horse's mouth. More of a skeptical side-eye. Why $50 an hour? She didn't even look up from her task at the cash register, methodically counting out the bills. Set it on your first day. You have to be good at following the rules. And if it's an important rule, you'd better be damn perfect. High expectations here. I made a face. Right? High expectations. You think I'm joking? No, ma'am, I think I am. Why did I even say that? I just think you're running a really cool operation here. Cooler than you might realize. Still works, but the whole thing seems fair. Christ, my waffling skills were abysmal. Add that to the list of deliberate mediocrity. Booyah! She looked up from her duties and gave me a stern look. I'm not running this ship, and following the rules around here means taking care of yourself. I'm sorry, but I am your employer, and I pay you well to be here. Sure, but you should be aware. There's a lot more going on here than just you and this diner. She glanced at her watch, then sighed. I usually save this speech for the end of the month, but you caught me halfway through. So Coles, if you don't think you have it in you to follow instructions clearly, without protest and without asking too many questions, then you should go. Quit. Noir. Nufo. A week's pay on the house. The conversation stalls shortly afterwards. I try to find an opening to ask more about what she meant, but she was closed to any further discussion. And you know what? That was fine. If she wanted me to put my head down and just do the work, I could do that. And work I did. And things were good. The mundane small talk with customers was fun. My colleagues were friendly and I was well paid. I'd found a place to park my life's failures, a place to build from. It must have been a Saturday, I think, when I first noticed it, an occupied seat in the back corner of the diner. I had no idea how long he'd been sitting there waiting, but he certainly looked patient. I had a strange feeling that he'd been left hanging for quite some time, although I couldn't really remember seeing him come in. Brown corduroy shirt, short hair, mid-50s it seemed, quite a calm smile, normal-looking guy. I started to make my way out the back and walked towards him. Immediately I felt a firm grip on my arm. It was Melanie, my boss, with a forceful grip, enough to make me drop my notepad. Her fingers wrapped around my forearm. She pinched my skin sharply. Important rules. She said, "What? Do you remember our conversation about rules? Well, this is the most important one. Okay, that man over there in the corner." She pointed to the man who had attracted my attention. He was sitting up straight, his hands gently clasped. Coyly, he smiled across his face. You don't go up to him. You don't say a word to him. But he's a customer. Her grip tightened. She hurt me, almost as if she was venting some kind of invisible rage on me. I'd like to ask you now, to be wise enough not to ask questions, and just follow. Don't go to his table. Don't talk to him. You can look at him. You can yell at him across the room if you want, although I can't imagine why you would ever need to do that. But you do not approach him, and you do not take his order. A sharp breath through your nose, a shake of the head, and a glare from my manager. It's different every time, but it's not pretty. I watched him from the short distance I was allowed. It was hard not to. So did she. Unlike the other customers here, I didn't get the feeling he was here to be alone, to reminisce, or to participate in the comfort ritual of a lackluster Eggs Benedict on rye. Instead, I had the feeling that he was just curious, mild-mannered, content but curious. My shift ended not long after that, so I didn't really get a chance to see him leave. Regardless, the experience of seeing him and learning about the with which he was associated left a bizarrely depressing feeling on my mind. I liked my job. I liked coming home and relaxing. I didn't mind being in the middle of nowhere. It was nice to look up at the empty sky filled with stars, to see them shimmer and twinkle, and even shoot across occasionally. I wished that things would stay simple in my life. I began to get a sense of his rhythm. He'd usually come around once a month. The rare times I got to see him, I tried to sneak in a question or two for my boss. Questions? Who is he? Where does he come from? And has anyone talked to him? All met mechanically with I don't know. I don't know. And if you're afraid, you're welcome to stop. Then, as fate would have it, one day boss lady became very ill. My colleagues and I had to persuade her to go home. In the middle of her shift, her illness fell uncomfortably, within the usual 1 to 3 day window. At the end of the month, when our client would, usually shows up, and of course he was there, right after she went home. To my advantage, the other waiters and waitresses on their rounds were well aware of his presence, and knew exactly what to do when he arrived. They all knew to avoid him, nevertheless driven by a fundamental curiosity that I just couldn't shake. I took the opportunity to go for it. I shouted a single thing across the floor, knowing that Melanie wasn't there to scold me. "Hello, sir. What brings you here?" I asked him. He turned his head from his fixed position in his seat and put his hand to his ear. "Clever." I said, "What brings you here?" I called out again, a few notches louder this time, which drew some strange looks from our Thursday regulars. To my surprise, he spoke back. I'm not sure why. I expected his voice to have the tone of some twisted, demented demon. Perhaps it was the fear that Melanie had instilled in me. The man sounded exactly like he looked. "I'm sorry, my love," he said. "I'm afraid I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you come and ask me again?" "No, I was good, and I don't want to be rude about the service," he continued, "but it feels like nobody's taken my order for a while now. For some time now. I let the exchange end there. I turned my attention back to the other guests. As always, he would disappear without fanfare. without the ringing of the doorbell, or any sight or sound of his footsteps across the diner floor. Our backroom conversations about him remained terribly brief. While he was there, he's just here, and he's gone. And the odd time when we really had to say, I feel really strange about this, took me a while to understand where my shamelessness in talking to this strange, middle-aged man. The truth was I was just scared of his presence, and all the questions associated with his being in our diner would disrupt the otherwise great arrangement I felt I had. It seemed right at the moment to stand on the very of my courage and say something to him. Of course, now that he was gone, I only felt worse. The next week, I have been invited to something quite interesting at work. I generally have a good insight into what Melanie, boss lady, does on a daily basis. The only element that remained elusive was her twice-weekly check-in with a particularly sharply dressed, agent-looking fellow. There was a fairly constant presence of state agents and similarly uniformed men and women who stopped by the diner, although I seldom paid them any mind beyond simply noticing them. In the middle of wiping down the tables, only an hour or so into my shift, Mel came by and said, "Hey, want you in the meeting with the big boss. If you have a few." "The big boss?" Sure. Yeah, coming. Only if you don't mind me asking, who is it?" She let her eyes speak to me, her unwritten rules. Questions are generally bad. "Thanks for the reminder, ma'am." We maneuvered ourselves into a back room and sat down at a table. Opposite us, already seated, was a man in a sharply tailored suit with a subtle earpiece in the aforementioned agent. The table was covered with a small, untidy pile of papers and documents. He made a point of sizing me up. He kept staring at me like a deer caught in the headlights. Not a care in the world about how awkward he was. He was doing it for me. Then he turned to Melanie. "How long has she been here?" he asked her in his gruff Western drawl. 6 months, she said. "You trust her?" "I trust her. Yes." He let his eyebrows say, "If you say so." Then he continued, "All right, so it seems you had a visit from the wandering man last week. He said. He motioned to Melanie. "We're out. But you?" The attention has now shifted to me, hasn't it? "Give me the lowdown." "The wandering man." The agent saw the confusion in my eyes. "Jesus, you didn't tell that girl anything, did you?" he said to Melanie. "Sir, I know it sounds strange," she said, "but I personally feel that the man is almost, curious. Like, perhaps the less I say to those who do not already know, the better." "Wandering man," the agent cut her off, "is our nickname for the guy who sits in the corner of your establishment. Or should I say the state's fine little establishment." "I'm sorry I asked." "That's right. The state's congratulations, ma'am. You're part of a government operation." The wandering man, not just a cute little nickname, but our legal definition of this tricky little problem, is a phenomenon we discovered many years ago. Back then, he would simply wander the desert landscape, chatting up unsuspecting strangers with bizarre questions. Everything fine, everything hunky-dory. A little weird, sure, but nothing illegal. Anyway, sometimes, things would happen because of him. Bizarre things, weird things. I could see Melanie moaning, worried about the picture being painted. Would this arouse my curiosity? "Have you, taken him in for?" I almost wanted to cut him off with my own stupid question, but he went on with it. "No, not because we don't want to, but because it might not be safe." The cozy mental image I'd had of this diner was beginning to shatter. "We have reason to believe he's a visitor," he said. I didn't attend another debriefing after that. Not because I was excluded, mind you. I just didn't want to know any more. There was no longer any curiosity in my gut. There was only a deep, aching fear. The agents and troopers, who sat in the middle of the restaurant, were now just a glaring reminder of what my dingy diner job really was. The government cavalry would usually show up around the end of the of the month when the wandering man was supposed to arrive. When he showed up, they wouldn't do much more than examine him from their distant desks, subtly scribbling notes in notebooks. He'd always act the same. He would just sit there. He wouldn't give them, or us, the diner staff, much to do. Speaking of staff, I remembered something Melanie had told me after my first month of working here, that the staff turnover in this diner was incredibly high. Knowing what everyone was getting paid at the time, it made absolutely no sense to me, now 7 months into the job, alongside an entirely new set of cooks, waiters and waitresses from when I'd started. I'd seen firsthand how true their statement was. None of the levers claimed as much, but I'm sure the underlying premise of who the diner was really for became unconsciously during her time here, and it probably didn't sit too well with them. I stayed, but not for the money. I'm not really sure why I did. We now had a new group of beginners who understood the vague of the situation, just like Melanie, me, and all the previous staff. Those who couldn't reconcile the situation with their natural curiosity, naturally filtered out. And then there was Malcolm. It was only his first week. He was an mega eager. He had bulldozed his way through a huge list of tasks and was already asking for the next batch of work. Anything he could get ahead of, anything he could fill in for, anything he could learn, he was in. He wanted to be as helpful as possible. I think the salary of the role for a guy of his young age was just too tempting for him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to get him to slow down. We were both doing the acting now. By this time, we'd more or less perfected it. There are things about this diner that rules you have to follow and not think about. Rules that are concrete, immutable, and non-negotiable. Like gravity. He nodded. At that moment, I really thought he was internalizing my words. And if that doesn't work for you, and if you don't think you can take care of yourself, then you shouldn't be working here. I continued. There was always a pit in my stomach whenever I saw the wandering man in the corner. During the same week that we were taking on new staff, I'm sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Melanie and I would both work the till. And if we saw anyone coming out of the back, we'd stop them with a simple grab of the arm. Malcolm came out and I did just that. A rough grab of his forearm, just as Melanie had done to me when I'd first started. He recoiled in surprise. Remember that little chat about rules we just had? I said. He nodded meekly, as if he was already in trouble. I pointed to the man at the other table in the brown corduroy shirt, staring straight ahead, with what I believed at the time to be no real reason to be here, and I said, "You will not serve this man under any circumstances. Do not go up to him. Don't talk to him. Pretend he doesn't exist." Malcolm lifted the bag he was holding in his left hand. In my nervousness, I hadn't really noticed what he was getting out for. "Just taking out the rubbish, man," he said. But I understood. And then he walked out the front door with his usual swagger. The bin wasn't as close as we would have liked, so I appreciated his willingness to take on the task. So early in his employment, I turned back to watch the wandering man. We had a number of agents present that day, scattered throughout the restaurant. The man was not one to speak often. Today was an interesting exception. "Officers," he said, "if you have any questions, feel free to join me at the table and ask them." The agents in the room responded mainly with snickers. "Seriously, if you come and sit with me, I'll be happy to spill the beans." Really, more laughter, but nobody bit. And yet he continued, "I know you're curious. I know you take notes. I know you talk about me. I know you built this place for me. I know you." As I reconciled the fact that this was the most words I'd ever heard in a row, I heard the bell ring. A door had opened. Malcolm wiped his hands as he entered through the diner's side door, a door that was to the right, next to the table where the wandering man was sitting. It was all happening so quickly, and yet it unfolded before me agonizingly slowly. as if there had been a moment, a single solitary second, when I could have intervened. The wandering man dropped any pretext of exchanging words with the agents, stopping his sentence in mid-sentence, and adopted a completely new demeanor. He played the role of a poor, miserable, tired man and said, 30 visits, terrible service every time, in a pathetic tone. Just as Malcolm walked by, Malcolm instinctively pulled a notepad from his breast pocket and turned his head to face the man. Hey, I got you, Chief. I can get you something. What are you? And then Malcolm froze, and the wandering man's, Cheshire cat wide, his neck alternately tensed and fluttered, with what seemed to be undeniable excitement. The man began to get up from the table, and then immediately, they were both gone. Malcolm and the wanderer had disappeared from existence. Completely, the madness of the moment was interrupted by the coded language I heard through a megaphone. Nonsensical agent speak that has been seared into my memory forever. Condition black. Roving target has compromised civilian. I repeat, a civilian has been compromised. And that was that. Melanie quit in the days that followed. She wasn't angry with me. She told me she always knew she'd leave. After the 10th disappearance. Why that particular milestone was necessary, I have no idea. All I could do from then on was keep working. On my way home or during my lunch break, I would look up at the stars and wish for Malcolm to be brought back home, back from wherever he'd been taken. The debriefing with the agents brought me no comfort. The exchange with them was simple and brief. Where had he been taken? The answer was, he's gone now, with an everlasting dagger in my soul. I had only the smallest silver lining, if you can call it that, a lesson. The lesson that I had to be even more vigilant, more diligent, and on days when the wandering man visited, the only waiter at the diner, no exceptions. I knew the agents weren't happy about this. None of them said so to me explicitly, but I could tell they were about to learn something new about him every time he took someone away, after a mistake was made. It was a strange Darwinian arrangement they had created. We were a zoo. They could use to learn more about a particular animal, a particular creature, particular visitor. No way. Now all you have to do is watch him sit, or wait for him to do something else. I waited for the 3 days. At the end of the month, when he usually appears, things were quiet until then. When he finally showed up, it wasn't what I expected. For the first time ever, I saw the wandering man through the front door. It was in the middle of the night at the end of my shift. I was at the till, paralyzed as he took step after step to close the distance. And then, there he was, standing in front of me, and I was sure, absolutely sure that I was going to die. He smiled. Don't worry, I have my own little set of rules that I play by, he said. I didn't say a word. This was no man's land at the moment. I know you've been curious about me. I've admired it. From the moment you first spoke to me, cautious curiosity is a great thing to see in someone, especially in such a ruthless species. Please just go. I'd like to answer your question about why I'm here. I'm sure you'd like to know why I'm here, wouldn't you? I'm not curious anymore. I swear I'm not. He laughed. The answer is really painful. This little game, this little charade I'm playing, it is just so incredibly fun. Please don't kill me. You really have a wonderful planet. I will return soon, I promise. Give me a month, maybe 2 this time. A sincere, friendly smile delivered with friendly eyes. I'll be back with a new game. And then he was gone. Took me a minute to notice. There was a cake box on the counter, next to me. Maybe it was there the whole time he was talking to me. Maybe it materialized right after he left. I opened the box and found Malcolm's severed head, a blank expression on his face, sitting on a bed of poorly and confusingly organized flowers, almost as if there had been an intention to create a flower arrangement, but no understanding of what would look like on top of the terrible display. Written in an almost childlike handwriting was a note that read, I brought him back just as you asked. The worst thing about being trapped in a diner, in the middle of nowhere, is realizing that there really is nowhere else to run. Anywhere else to run to. Every single part of our planet is covered in stars. By open skies, someone could drop in at any time,